All right, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rachakwadash. Double honors to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone who rule very well, very beautifully. Double salutations be unto the Akim, out here pushing his gospel and truth and his sincerity to the best of their ability, given to them by Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai. Peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Lord willing, fall upon your houses. This is the brother Quana Wath come back at you, Lord will, with edifying lesson through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Lord will. It is edifying, Lord will. It is straight to the point. And, what you're seeing right here on the screen was, which originally, because something I tend to do is, when I'm driving down the freeway, here in Arizona, you get a lot of cars that have, the license plate will start with like a H or a G, and then it'll have, a series of 4 numbers. And what I tend to do is I tend to type it in, as you see right here, Strong's H, and whatever number it is. Well, in this case, it was Strong's G 6970. Which there is no Strong's 6970, the Strong's H, right, 6970. So I went ahead and looked that up, my wife was in the car, so I had her look it up, and she read it to me. I just kind of waited, until I got home to, kind of dig into it a little bit more, and this is ultimately what, was pulled up, right? It says Strong's H 6970 refers to the Hebrew word koa, right, meaning curtailment, or a proper geographic name for a tribe or region in Babylonia, right, in Babylon, right, ancient Babylon, and it was heavy, which again, it's, mentioned, right, in Ezekiel 23, as it says right there, which it was super heavy because, we were really, at the time, me and my wife, we were talking about, just, everything that's going on, in America, right? How things are getting worse. I had mentioned, that I had watched, a video from, the brother, Arrows of Indignation on YouTube, and how he basically, was going into how, just America's fucked right now. It's the most recent video he put up, but basically everything is screwed up, right? America is falling, right? We're at the absolute end. And as we were speaking about that, I had seen this, and it's real spiritual, right? Because when you go into that word curtailment, right, it says right here, curtailment means the act of reducing, limiting, or cutting something short, right? And America's time, right, Esau's time in rulership is being cut short, right? As you read, and we'll grab it. Right, built through the spirit, right? This is Job 14 and verse 5, right? It says, seeing his days are determined, the number of his months are with thee. Thou hast appointed his bounds that he cannot pass. So, right, we're at the point where Esau's rulership is really over, right? We're at the end of his rulership. We're at the end of this American empire, and really we're approaching, right, the very beginning of it that followeth, which is a righteous, rulership, right? An Israelite rulership, right? Starting with, Yahweh Shai on down, right? That's the time that we're approaching, and we seeing it, right? Those who are, on their watch guard, those who are really paying attention and watching, right? We see what's going on, right? We're seeing the end of America, and really it's starting, it's starting within, right? The fall of America is starting within. Right, we're seeing the American economy, right, collapse. We're seeing the American dollar, right, being ditched, right, at an all-time high. And I was watching this guy right here, which I'm not gonna play the video. Zhang Uncovered, which he has a couple other channels, but this guy isn't necessarily, an economist or a widely known economist. This guy is some kind of, former professor, right? He's got his degree from Yale. I was looking him up a little bit, just to see what this guy's about, and he's not, one of those professional economists or whatnot, but something that he was stating in, this video right here, right, is that like the countries are starting to sell their treasury bonds, right? Basically selling the debt, right? Selling American debt, right? Which America ultimately, banks on these countries buying more debt, right? Which will ultimately, again, keep the dollar strong, right? And allow for the American economy, right, to flourish, right? Well, he stated that these countries are starting to sell their treasury bonds, man, to protect their local currencies, to protect, their economy, right? Since, especially with, this whole war going on, between America, Iran, the Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz, America putting on their blockade, right, acting as if they're the ones in control, right? But this is affecting the global market, right, which is affecting these countries and their currencies and their economies, right? So what they're doing is they're, selling, right, the American treasury bonds, and then taking those dollars, right, that they get from those treasury bonds and switching the currency, right, going from American dollars to whatever currency, whether it be the Chinese yuan or the Japanese yen, right, the Russian ruble, so on and so forth, man, right? And you got major players, right, major holders of American debt, right, are selling, their treasury bonds, and I was looking that up, right here. It's kind of, putting on my Berean cap, man, and looking up what this guy was selling or what this guy was saying, right? And it says right here, it says I asked what countries are selling their U.S. Treasury bonds, right? It says major international holders like Japan, China, India, and Saudi Arabia have recently sold billions of dollars in U.S. Treasury bonds to raise cash, defend their dipping local currencies against a strong dollar, or diversify their national reserves into assets like gold. So more countries are purchasing gold, right? Again, stepping away from the dollar, right? Which these nations, are realizing, right, that the dollar, that the American dollar is really just, it's bullshit, right? There has no real value, right? Since going off of the gold standard, right? Nixon taking us off the gold standard, which the elder apostle, elder apostle Rimlob, mentions, right, frequently, taking us, again, being removed off the gold standard. That dollar, it really doesn't have any actual backing to it, and again, these nations are starting to realize that, and they're stepping away from the dollar, which weakens the dollar, right? Saudi Arabia was in a 50-year deal with America to sell and trade their oil in American currency, and they said no, right? We're not going to renew that deal, right? Which was a major blow to the U.S. dollar, right? We'll keep reading. It says major countries reducing U.S. debt holdings, right? Japan remains the largest foreign holder, but has periodically offloaded massive amounts, such as tens of billions at a time, to stabilize and defend the yen, right? So they're worried about their own currency, China has steadily cut its portfolio down to multi-year lows as part of a long-term de-dollarization strategy and shift toward gold, right? India and Brazil have trimmed significant portions of their U.S. bond holdings to manage local economic pressure and reserve needs, right? And then it says Gulf and other nations, countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE and Taiwan also have sold off portions of their holdings during periods of global market shifts and rising energy costs, right? Which is now, right? Again, the Strait of Hormuz, right? Which, supplies around, 20%, really a fifth, if not, a quarter of the world's, oil supply, comes from, that area. So a lot of these countries are definitely affected, right? Heavily affected, and, Trump, basically, trying to corner the oil market, right? Taking over Venezuela, and making it to where, majority countries have to go to America for oil now, right? Majority of countries have to go to America, for their oil needs. But see, that's not enough to sustain the dollar, right? That's not enough to keep the dollar afloat when nations are basically getting rid of tens billions of dollars, in treasury bonds, selling it, right? And again, then transitioning, right, those dollars into a different currency, really not giving a fuck about the dollar anymore, excuse my language, it says why countries sell U.S. bonds. Currency defense. Selling U.S. treasuries provide liquid dollars that central banks can use to buy back and support their own weakening local currency. Right? Changing, going from dollar to yen or dollar to, whatever their country, their currency is. Right? They're willing to take that loss, if you will. Right? Because right now the dollar still has, prominence over all these other currencies, to a certain degree, but that power is waning, right? It says reverse diversification, right? Many nations are reducing risk by moving away from U.S. sovereign debt and purchasing physical gold or alternative for foreign assets, right? Liquidity and global shock. Sudden spikes in commodity prices like oil or geopolitical conflicts force some central banks to tap into their dollar reserves, so again, this is what is happening, and this is what is taking place currently, right? And that, again, that's going to affect, the American economy as a whole and the American consumer, right? I asked a question with chat. It's pretty long, so I'm not going to, go into all of it, right? I'll just read a little bit, right? This is my question, right? What does it mean for USD or US dollar and the US economy when major countries like Japan, China, India, etc. sell their treasury bonds, right? It says, yes. If major foreign holders such as Japan, China, India sell large amounts of U.S. Treasury bonds, it could put upward pressure on the U.S. interest rates and create downward pressure on the dollar. But the effect depends heavily on what they do with the money, right? It says, and this is particularly relevant right now because foreign Treasury holdings have been declining, right? More countries are selling off their treasury holdings, right? It says in June 2026, foreign held treasuries fell to about 9.3 trillion, with Japan, the UK, and China amongst the biggest sellers. Japan held about 1.17 trillion, while China held about 633 billion, right? That number is decreasing, right? It says, here's the chain reaction. Think of it like this. Foreign country sells treasuries. Treasury supply available to buyers increase, right? That means you could buy more treasuries, right? Because now, again, as countries sell them, right, they go back on the market, right, for countries to buy those treasury bonds, which, again, America needs the countries to buy those treasury bonds because what that does is, again, it allows the dollar to stay in power, therefore allowing the American economy, right, to continue to flourish, right? It says treasury prices fall, right? It says what? Treasury yields rise, U.S. borrowing becomes more expensive. The important relationship is bond prices go down, bond yields go up. So if Japan suddenly sells hundreds of billions of dollars of treasuries, someone has to absorb those bonds. If buyers aren't willing to buy them at the existing price, the price has to fall under the yield until the yield becomes attractive enough to bring buyers in. So, again, right, the cost of those, meaning America is not really going to be getting any kind of, large amount of money per treasury bond, right? Whereas let's say the treasury bond, 1 billion, right? Well, nobody's going to want to buy that, right? So they have to wait till that, that price of it goes down to 500 million, right? So instead of America making $1 billion, right? Now they're only making 500 million, right? So the money, right, that's coming in, right, is going lower and lower and lower, right? It says the U.S. government borrowing gets more expensive. This is probably the biggest consequence. The U.S. government constantly issues new treasury debt to finance deficits and refinance existing debt. If treasury yield rise, the government has to offer investors a higher interest rate. That means higher treasury yields, right? Higher federal interest expense, larger deficits, more debt issuance, potentially more treasury supply. That's the nasty feedback loophole policymakers worry about. The U.S. national debt is now above 40 trillion, and interest costs have become an increasingly significant part of federal spending, right? And see this right here, it goes into again, right? If nobody is buying, treasury bonds, right? The interest rates for them go up, right? The yields go up, which again does not benefit America or the American consumer, right? The average American consumer, right? It means prices for us across the board are going to go up, right? It says treasury yields influence the broader U.S. financial system. If the 10-year treasury yield rises substantially, you can see upward pressure on mortgage rates. People are going to be paying more for their homes, right? Corporate borrowing, auto loans, right? Meaning you're going to see prices for cars and interest rates on cars going up, right? Business loans, right? And credit markets. It says, so foreign treasury selling doesn't necessarily stay inside Washington's finances. It can eventually hit American households and businesses. Recent increase in long-term treasury yields have already been associated with higher borrowing costs across the economy, right? So let's drop down, right? Because this is heavy, I want to get to the point though, right? Again, this is right here. It says, here's the part I think you're getting at. If you're asking whether China, Japan, India, and other countries reducing treasury holdings could eventually threaten the US dollar, and the answer is yes. But treasury selling by itself isn't enough. You'd want to watch the four things simultaneously, right? It says, here's two categories, right? Indicator and what would concern me, right? It says foreign treasury holdings, sustained large decline, which they are, right? Treasury yields, rapidly rising long-term yields. Dollar, persistent decline against major currencies, right? And it says gold and alternative reserves, countries aggressively increasing it, which more countries are purchasing gold, and again, which is real money, right? Gold and silver is real money, right? Not like these fiat currencies and whatnot, petrodollars and shit like that, right? That's not real currency. That's not real money. Real money is gold and silver, right? It says, if all four happen together, that's much more significant than simply seeing China sell treasuries 1 month. And we are already seeing pieces of this story. Foreign treasury holdings have declined, long-term U.S. yields have been elevated, and global investors have been reassessing government debt and inflation risks, right? So that again, right, we're seeing at least 3 of the 4, really we're seeing all 4 happen and take place, and we see it, right? If you're truly paying attention, if you're truly watching, you're seeing all of this happen and take place, in real time, again, showing you that America is losing. America is declining, right? We're at the end of this American empire, this American regime, So let's grab this. I'm going to grab, a couple precepts, and, we'll end up closing out, right? This is Jeremiah, right? Jeremiah chapter 51 and verse 12, right? NLT. It says, raise the battle flags against Babylon, right? Which of Babylon, is talking about Babylon the Great, a.k.a. America, right? It says, reinforce the guard and station the watchman. Prepare an ambush for Yahweh B'Hashem Yahshua will fulfill all his plans against Babylon. And we're seeing it, right? We're seeing Yahweh B'Hashem Yahshua starting to, have it to where Babylon's allies, right, and even, major allies, right, of America, right, are starting to step away from America doing business. Like right now, Canada, right, is basically putting, what do you call those? What is that word? Retaliatory tariffs on America, right? Because Trump put a 50% tariff on Canada, right? And they're saying it goes against basically the treaty that they have, between America, Mexico, and Canada, right? What is it? Basically free trade is what it is, right? But then here you go, America is throwing tariffs on everybody, right? And Canada's like, no, we're supposed to be partners, we're right next to each other. It's and so they're putting on retaliatory tariffs on America, and that's going to cause prices, on both sides of the border to go up, right? But especially here in America, right? America is one of the largest import countries in the world, right? A vast majority of all the material and product and stuff like that's here in America comes from other countries, right? Why? Because America expedited or extradited, right, a lot of its manufacturing, right, into these other countries, so they can ultimately produce and manufacture whatever it is, at a cheaper price, and then ultimately what, come here and sell it, in America, you know you know for a larger amount and make a lot of money, right? America is this place of commerce, right? As it says right here in verse 13, it says, you are rich, you are a city by a great river, a great center of commerce, right? It says, but your end has come, the thread of your life is cut. And the thread of the life of America is the money system, right? The dollar, right? Which again is being, devalued. America is done. America's over. A lot of these nations are not messing with America no more, man. America's over, man. Let me grab this. Jeremiah 50 and verse 7. Jeremiah 51 and verse 7. KJV. We'll start at KJV. It says, Babylon had been a golden cup in the Lord's hand, right? That made all the earth drunken. The nations have drunken of her wine, therefore the nations are mad. And again, at one point, right, these nations have, taken on that money system, that philosophy, that way of life, absorbed all of it, right? And now, right, they see that it's done nothing, but hurt them. It's getting in bed with America has never really benefited them, man. They've always just been screwed. Right, so now they're saying, no, we don't want anything to do with America. We don't want anything to do with its money system. It's fraudulent, right? Money system. We don't know nothing to do with it, right? And now they're turning to buying gold, real money, right? Something that has real value, Verse 8 says, Babylon is suddenly fallen and destroyed. How for her? Take balm for her pain, if so she may be healed. And again, right, they're trying to do any and everything they can to do, right, to keep this economy afloat, right? Again, with Trump, trying to corner the oil market, right, and make these countries, purchase oil, which he's making them do it in, obviously, in American dollars, but that's not going to heal America. That's not going to save the economy, right? That's not going to make prices go down. It's not going to happen at all, right? All it's going to do is piss off these countries even more. And they're going to say, hey, well, guess what? We might buy oil from you, but everything else, we ain't buying shit from you. Which is going to completely, or we're not going to sell, or, we're not going to, this, that, and the third, It's just, it's going to get worse for America, right? Verse 9, we would have healed Babylon, but she is not healed. Forsake her and let us go, everyone, into his own country, for her judgment reacheth unto heaven and is lifted up even to the skies. And you do have people, right, leaving America, right? You have these nations, right, going back to their own countries, because the American dollar is dropping, right, and their own local currencies, right, like Chinese, right, because China is dumping these treasury bonds, right, and switching their money back over to the yuan. It's making their currency stronger, right, and the dollar weaker, which means, again, right, the the buying power that these people have of the dollar is becoming lower and lower. Therefore, they're like, hey, you know what? Our currency at home is getting stronger. Let's go back home, and we see it happening, right? Again, showing you that America's done for. Right, let me go ahead and grab one more and we'll close out. Right, Jeremiah 51, what is that? Is it 50 and 25? Hold on. Thine end come. Right, this is Jeremiah 51 and verse 13. Get to the point, right? It says, "Oh thou that," KJV. That was a point. I'll read it again, right, in KJV. It says, "O thou that dwellest upon many waters, abundant in treasures, thine end is come, and the measures of thy covetousness. right? America's done for, man. This place is over. You know? This place is over, man. Yahweh Shem Shah is truly destroying this place, and we can see it. You know? That's all I got, man. Lord wills, edifying. Lord wills, straight to the point. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shah, Bahashim, Rachak, Wadash, double honor to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone. Till next time, I say Shalom.